Welcome to this explainer. The tabla is so much more than just a drum. It is literally the heartbeat of Indian classical music. Today, we're tracing its incredible transformation. We're going to journey from its ancient, almost mythical water-inspired origins, all the way to its prestigious place in royal courts. Along the way, we'll break down the structural evolution that gave the tabla its distinct voice, especially when you compare it to older instruments, and we'll meet the brilliant modern masters who absolutely defined its iconic sound. So let's get into this story of rhythm, heritage, and identity.
So, how did the sound of rain create India's most iconic drum? Well, to understand where the tabla actually comes from, we have to travel way back to around 200 BC. There's this story detailed in the ancient Indian treatise on performing arts, the Natya Shastra. Picture this, okay? A sage named Swati Muni goes to a lake to fetch water. Suddenly, a massive gusty rainstorm rolls in. But instead of just running for cover, Swati Muni stops and listens. He observes this profound natural phenomenon, heavy raindrops thumping against broad lotus leaves and then tapping lightly on the smaller, curved ones. It created this stunning medley of musical tones. This exact moment sparked his imagination and led to the invention of ancient hollow body percussion. He was quite literally trying to capture the sound of rain. How amazing is that?
All right, really quickly, here is the roadmap for our journey today. First up, raindrops to royal courts. 2, Pakawaj versus modern tabla. 3, evolving for the Khayal. And finally, number 4, maestros, the Rakwa and Hussein. Section 1, raindrops to royal courts, a 2,000-year journey. Okay, so following Swati Muni's inspiration, he teamed up with a master craftsman to create the Tripushkar. Now, this was a drum made of 3 units, but as you can imagine, over time, functionality and portability kind of took over. If we look at ancient sculptures in the Baja caves, we can actually see this 3-part drum getting simplified into a 2-part drum called the dar, which was championed by the Rajput Dadi clan. Fast forward to the 10th century, and cultural exchanges from Middle Eastern invaders brought in these horse-mounted battle drums called tabla jung. And actually, the very name tabla likely emerged from this, mimicking the booming sound of the drum itself. Centuries of refinement pass, bringing us eventually to the 18th century, which is huge because that's when the Delhi Gharana, the very first formal musical lineage and school for the tabla, was officially founded. Moving right along to Section 2, Pakawaj versus modern tabla, the anatomy of sound. Now, if you've ever looked closely at a tabla, or its predecessor, the Pakawaj, you've definitely noticed that black circle right on the drum head. That is the siyahi. It's this incredibly carefully crafted paste made of soil, iron filings, and an animal glue known as saras. This dense mixture physically weighs down the drum head. Why does that matter? Well, it manipulates the pitch and creates that distinct resonant ping that you instantly recognize. The crucial thing to remember here is that both the pakawaj and the modern tabla utilize this central siyahi, but how they apply it physically alters their entire musical identity. There is a really stark physical contrast between these two instruments. Let's look at the left drum, the bayon. On the pakawaj, it's actually dressed with fresh dough to create resonance, but on the tabla, the bayon uses a fixed off-center siyahi. This is a game changer because it adds complex texture and depth without needing constant reapplication. And then there's the playing style. The pakawaj is played with this open-handed horizontal motion, which creates a loud, booming, highly percussive sound. The tabla, though, is played with these incredibly agile vertical strikes using just 2 fingers. The result is a subtler, way more varied, and deeply introspective sound profile. And this perfectly illustrates how their mechanical differences matched their spiritual homes. It makes total sense when you think about it. The loud, booming pakawaj was the companion to Drupad singers. That's an ancient, austere style of singing performed in grand, devotion-filled Haveli temple halls, singing praises to the gods. You needed volume for that. The softer, more nuanced tabla, on the other hand, found its home in the royal courts. It echoed the poetic intricacies of a musical form called khayal, which was all about praising kings and lovers, kind of blurring those lines between the divine and the beloved. That brings us to Section 3, evolving for the khayal, a rhythmic revolution. For a really long time, the tabla was pretty much overlooked. It was just a humble folk drum, sometimes literally just tied to the waists of dancers. But then, in the 18th century, a shocking musical duel completely changed its trajectory. Picture this, a tabla player named Siddhar Khan faces off against a master pakawaj player, Bhavwani Das, and in a massive upset, Siddhar Khan actually wins. This victory absolutely turned heads. Right around this time, a gifted composer named Siddharang realized something. He noticed the harsh, loud rhythms of the pakawaj were clashing with the emotional, lyrical depth of the newly emerging khayal music style. So he tasks his student, Khushro Khan, to physically refine the tabla. This refinement was exactly what was needed. It led to widespread royal acceptance, and just like that, the tabla became a classical court staple. So, what made it so expressive? At the very heart of this refined tabla is the aesthetic principle of khali and bari, the interplay of empty and filled beats. By choosing exactly when to strike the bass drum for this booming, resonant, filled beat, and when to just lightly top the treble drum while leaving the bass completely silent for a sharply contrasting empty beat, the tabla moves way beyond just keeping time. It basically becomes a language of its own. Through these incredibly subtle strokes and pauses, this mechanical innovation breathes life into the rhythm, making the tabla a uniquely introspective instrument. And finally, Section 4, Maestros, Thiraqua and Hussein. Let's talk about the legends who gave this instrument its modern voice. First up is the legendary Ahmed Jan, affectionately known by everyone as Therwak. I absolutely love this quote from him. He once said, "Handle tabla with love. If you bang it, it will give you a headache." I mean, how great is that? This brilliant, slightly humorous analogy completely humanizes the instrument. Therwak deeply believed in playing with total ease, using the absolute minimum body and finger movement possible. His whole philosophy centered around maintaining sur, or resonance. He truly believed that if you just treat the instrument gently, it will speak beautifully right back to you. Thiraqua actually famously categorized tabla players into 3 distinct types. First, you have the strong-armed players, the ones who just, hammer away at the drum. Then you have the mathematicians, those who are totally obsessed with complex beat manipulations. And finally, the authentic players, the ones who play with genuine sensibility. Thiraqua actively disliked math-heavy calculations. He wasn't a fan of things like lumcha tihais, which are these long, drawn-out rhythmic resolutions that require intense mental gymnastics. Instead of mathematical acrobatics, he favored short, elegant variations that really allowed the music to breathe and resonate. Now let's contrast Tiraqua's approach with another absolute giant of the era, Ustad Amir Hussain. While Tiraqua's style was all about effortless resonance, he even specifically tuned his drums to a G-sharp pitch, so his open strokes, like a ding or dinadina, would reverberate perfectly and create this beautiful, continuous drone. Amir Hussain was a different story. Hussain actually ran away to Bombay in his youth just so he could study tabla. He represented this highly structured devotion to the Delhi bach, which is a very specific foundational fingering technique born in the capital. He was incredibly prolific, composing well over 500 original pieces. On top of that, he meticulously documented 1,000 ancient compositions from old masters, all in a single Urdu notebook. But guys, here is where our story takes a slightly tragic turn. After Amir Hussain passed away in 1969, his family faced some really severe hardships, and sadly, his son passed away at a very young age. Because of this chain of events, Amir Hussain's priceless Urdu notebook, the one containing over 1,000 unrecorded ancient compositions from the old masters, is believed to have disappeared forever, which really leaves us with a provocative question to end on. What happens to the music when the master's notebook disappears? It forces us to pause and ponder exactly how we preserve these fleeting, unrecorded traditions in our modern era. Because at the end of the day, the tablet might be made of wood, leather, and iron dust, but its true survival, that depends entirely on the human hands that pass its echoes from one generation to the next.